Hey, everybody, Keith Niebuhr with Gators Online, and we've got a special guest today. A couple weeks ago, we had Gator great Lee McGriff on, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Believe it or not, Lee, they loved you, and they want more of you. They can't get enough of you. So you're back.
Keith, I don't believe it, but thank you.
You're back, and who better to talk about last week's Florida-Utah game than you? And also, we'll discuss that game. We'll break down the things you saw and didn't see, the things you like, maybe some things you think they can work on moving forward. And then also looking ahead. That's the big thing. I mean, you can break down a past game to no end, but really, what does it mean moving forward? And you obviously played at Florida, you coached at Florida, and then you have the perspective of having the eagle's eye view of being a commentator for so many years as well. So, Lee, let's just get right to it. I mean, it wasn't pretty. 24-11 Utah, very disappointing, deflating for the Gator Nation. What were some of your takeaways from last Thursday's game?
Well, this is, excuse me, might sound like rationalizing, but I think it's a factor that needs to be considered. Last year, Utah came all the way across the country to play us. Hurricanes were an issue. We beat them. And they went on to win their conference. They beat Southern Cal twice and played in the Rose Bowl. Got beat, but they won 10 games. So I'm sure the Utah faithful, who are certainly more comfortable with their head coach than the Gator faithful is right now with ours. But regardless, this Gator team had to leave town on a Tuesday, which is the same as leaving town on Thursday on a Saturday game, stop in Dallas, practice in an unfamiliar setting, pack it up, go to Utah the next day. To think that's not disruptive is probably pretty unrealistic. Now, the expectation is if you're good, you overcome it, you play well. But excuse me. To think that what we saw is necessarily what we're going to continue to see, I'm a little more reserved on that. That was a disruptive week, and certainly the Gators made enough mistakes for a couple of games. But I think that is one factor that things were weird for the Gator team and their preparation last week, to include playing on Thursday. Utah had to play on Thursday too. I realize it. So I think that's a factor. Obviously, there was disappointment in the offense. I was hoping we'd run the ball. We would run the ball better than we did. We didn't do that very well. And I know there are different linemen. We have two proven running backs. So the running game was a concern. And it is Billy Napier's way. There was a commitment to that for quite a while. I'm not so sure he shouldn't have thrown it around a little more sooner and more often. Defensively, I thought there's some hope. We tackled pretty well, which is usually an Achilles heel of the Gator teams in the last few seasons, but most early in the season. And, you know, I'm still unclear about a lot of things. And to everybody, I say everybody, realizes I don't do the broadcast anymore. So I don't go to practices often. I don't get the inside that I normally get. I watched it on TV like everybody else. And so, you know, there's things that I just can't see on the TV that if I was there live or had seen some practices that I might be able to see. But I don't think all is lost with this defense. And so disturbing some of the coaching mistakes that were made, but I'm not ready to throw in the towel. And I just think that was an odd game. And I think it just needs to be put to the side and see where we go from here. Of course, we play McNeese State, and the expectations are that we easily win this game. But to get back on rhythm, get back on our schedule, to have a home game, hopefully Gator fans show up. I think we don't know who we are yet, but when we get back on rhythm, we'll know more shortly.
Lee, it kind of had, and correct me if I'm wrong, it kind of had the feel of one of those. There's those anomaly away games that we've seen historically for Florida football. The Syracuse game in '91 that everybody remembers, the blowout up at Syracuse, the '90 loss at Tennessee, the 45-3, where anything that could go wrong could go wrong. The Mississippi State game in '92 on the road on a Thursday night. By the way, you don't see Florida play on Thursday night too many times. I think that was 30-6 Mississippi State. And so we've seen that before. You're right. That's there's always these flash anomalies like that. But over on that, you mentioned some of the things that were discouraging to you. But was there one thing that stood out for the fans? It seems to be generally the play of the offensive line with the mistakes, the penalties, those key penalties on third down, and then obviously the one special team snafu with the two guys having the same jerseys on the field at the same time. But was there one alarming thing to you, most discouraging thing to you out of all the things that went wrong?
Yeah, just kind of, it felt chaotic to me at times. By the way, that duplicate number, I'm not trying to take away the coaching mistake of that. And I know Coach Napier indicated that they've gone over it and they should know in certain punt return situations, those number threes aren't supposed to be in at the same time. But I have found it for years ridiculous that duplicate numbers are allowed anyway. Back in the day, there were no duplicate numbers. You got your own number. There was never this confusion. But it just there just seemed to be no rhythm. We seem to be disjointed, and I felt that too. And I don't know that there was any one single incident. It just that was the overall feeling. But I'm having a hard time believing that is going to be chronic for us. I know I'm a Gator. I want to be optimistic. I just don't think that that's going to be chronic issues of feeling that disorganized.
Okay, well, encouraging takeaways. There were some. In any loss you can find something. Graham Mertz was pretty steady out there. The defense, like you mentioned. But so, what would be the one? Was it the defense? Was that the most encouraging thing for you?
I do think so.
Okay.
I do think so. And we needed a shutout from them that day, but we didn't get it. But I think there's some people that can play. And, I give Utah credit. We, in the first offensive series, it felt jittery to me. We felt unnerved. And I give the Utah coaches credit for getting that ball and coming right after us through that deep post. But the fact is, there were guys there. They didn't make the play, but they were there. We got a freshman, a starting freshman safety. Well, that's a pretty big moment, for those guys. So that's one of their scores. Good move by Utah to strike like they did. But so you take away that, but you can't. It happened. But we go the rest of the game, give up 17 points. You win a lot of games giving up 17 points. And so I think this defense may be pretty good.
Okay, fair enough. You had heard some good things going into the season about Graham Mertz, the Gators starting quarterback. Did that line up with what you saw, last Thursday?
Well, I would have liked to have seen him throw more early. And I thought he could get the ball. He missed some. But at the end of the game, I was seeing he's getting it to the right people. And it looked good. And I just thought, maybe we should have been doing more of that early. So again, he doesn't have a lot of bling to him, but he doesn't have to. That if the running game can improve and he's got some people to throw to, I think his accuracy is pretty good. Again, he was inches off on a few, but and I think he can think. We're going to see. We're going to see, but I'm not so sure. People are just thinking, oh, blah, this is nothing. Of course, you've read it too. This is the same thing at Wisconsin. Well, I didn't see him play much at Wisconsin, so I don't know that. But I didn't see a bad quarterback in that game.
I mean, he didn't lose the game, right? I mean,
that's fair.
Yeah. Lee, the penalties, just killed so many drives, helped their drives, hurt Florida's drives. They're going to happen, obviously, but it doesn't seem like Florida has the kind of offense that is built for such mistakes that it can overcome at this point. But are these, when coaches say things are correctable, I mean, every mistake theoretically is correctable. So from what you've seen, though, how much of an impact, how good could the offense be if it can clean up that part? Now, we know the offensive line's got to block better, but just the penalties alone, that really killed a lot of the flow the other night, I thought.
There is a very old saying, and one of them was hated back in the day by Florida fans, said by the head coach during that time: you have to avoid losing before you win. I understand somebody said that recently this last week. Who was it? Was it do you remember who said it?
I'm not sure, but who was the original coach that said it? Was that your coach?
Coach Dickey brought that philosophy from yeah. Tennessee. And people thought that meant don't try to win or don't do something exciting. It meant you can't do things to beat yourself and expect to win. Penalties are one of those. You can't, especially when you don't have an offense that's just explodes. When Steve Spurrier, he used to get off delay a game or offsides all the time, and it'd be, 1st and 15 or 3rd and 15. Didn't matter because the plays that he ran were going to get 15 or 20 yards all the time anyway. In this offense, it's more conservative. And so when you put yourself in the hole with these kind of penalties, especially at this stage with our offense, they're very damaging. Penalties, they're going to happen, but they're inexcusable. So, of course, a coach would say they're fixable. They are. But, is that because there's too much motion, too much movement trying to get lined up and all of that? Maybe you have to simplify formation. Maybe you don't do quite as much motion. I don't know exactly internally what they need to do, but they should be fixable. And sometimes coaches can outthink themselves and want to do some things that the players aren't quite ready to do. And, but jumping off sides, all of that, you can't have it. Everybody knows that, but they're particularly damaging with an offense like this right now.
Lee, I'm an old soul, and I went back and watched just for the fun of it. I started thinking, I've always joked with offensive coordinators about this, Chad Morris, Chip Lindsey, guys that Rhett Lashley, guys that I covered at Auburn. And I said, well, what would stop you from, on a 3rd and short, 4th and short, from doing the Landry shift? You need a first down really bad and just get that other team to jump offside. And I went down the rabbit hole, watched an old Cowboys game from the Tom Landry era of the 1970s, and to watch the Cowboys offensive line go up and down every play and have that discipline and never false start, Lee, was unbelievable. Couldn't believe it. But let's talk about something else. Let's move on to something else here. The mental state of the team. Again, you've played in these situations, or played on teams that have gone through this. You've coached on teams that have gone through this. You've commentated for so many years. So you've seen this, the highs and lows, the peaks and valleys of football. This is 4 losses in a row for the program. Now, each team is its own entity from one season to the next. I get that, okay? But 4 losses in a row. Can you almost forget how to win in a sense? I mean, what's the mental state of a team that lost 4 games in a row right now?
Well, I'd be willing to bet these players lost 1 game in a row in their minds. Okay. New Year's. And I do think players are far more resilient than the fans and the coaches. If you're a player and you feel like it's almost like a death for a day or so, but if you love to play and you get to go play another game, and players can shake it off faster than fans and coaches. We just grind on it. But what am I doing today? I don't get to go throw and catch and run around and start thinking about the next game, and maybe this could be a great game, or maybe I can have just a great Saturday myself and all that. And so I choose to believe that this team will be far more excited about the next game. They don't care who it is. It's McNeese. They get to play in the swamp, and you want to get rid of that bad feeling as a player, and it's part of a coach's job. They got to get over it too, and do it much faster than fans do. I mean, by the next morning on a Sunday morning, these coaches they start digging into McNeese State big time, and they got to look forward. They can't. They feel that game. They process it. They got to learn, but they've got to move on too. So players are the most resilient. Coaches have to be next. Fans, what do? We just sit in the mud puddle, bemoaning what happened for days. I think these kids move on and come out to play, and hopefully they'll turn it loose, go after it. And part of it is, regardless of the score, when you're making those kind of mistakes, those kind of penalties, one of the things as a coach you say, I don't care what the score is, no offsides, no delay games, no this, no that. This is a game where we're going to play error free, and that can become a goal in a game like this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you're playing an opponent that's overmatched, what can you learn? So, they just played a pretty solid team in week one. Now you're playing a team that's an FCS team. Florida's going to have more talent. Can you really learn much from a game like this?
What you look for is, do you play with intensity? When you're you're looking at your players. If I'm the receiver coach, I'm watching my guys. Do they run their routes like they're supposed to? Do they block like they're supposed to? Do they do it with intensity? Do they come off the ball, like they're going deep every time? Pick any position. Are they playing as intensely and as focused as they should be? Score's irrelevant. And if I'm a player, maybe I didn't even catch a ball against Utah, and I don't like that. Or maybe I go get to catch a bunch of balls against McNeese State. I'm excited. You come alive that way. And again, if you love to play, I've said this to fans before, so you don't think this game's a big deal. In your life, if you could have put on the Gator uniform and played in the swamp against anybody, how excited would you be? Well, then most people say it'd be the dream of my life. Well, it is for these guys. They get to go do that.
Lee, back in the 1970s, Florida had just this incredible wide receiver, dynamic, wasn't very tall, could do a little bit of everything. The other night, Eugene Wilson makes his debut for the Florida Gators, true freshman from Tampa, reminded a lot of people of another young receiver in the 70s from Tampa who could do it all, Lee McGriff. Did you see Shane?
Don't put that lead ball around that boy's waist, his neck. I mean, he might be good.
Well, look. I mean, you were obviously fantastic. But what? Look, he did a lot in the limited times he got the ball the other night. He showed some flashes, and that got people talking. What did you think? What did you think of Eugene Wilson, and what's the potential there? Maybe
he can move. He can move, and especially at receiver, looking at that, he caught the ball. It looked sure. The ball was sure in his hands. And when he accelerated, he went fast quickly. I thought, wow, we need to get him the ball sooner, more often. And he looked good. He really did. That was exciting.
We don't say wow very often for true freshmen out there. I mean, are you hearing, from what you've seen and what you've heard, are you hearing special talent with this guy or what?
Maybe so. I don't want to overextend my.
Sure.
But my first reaction is, if I knew nothing about him and just turned on the TV and he played, the way he moved struck me that he's moving a little bit different speed than everybody else. So, and I don't just mean fast, but he's football fast. He's decisive and he does things quickly.
All right, Lee, seriously, now back to the 1970s. I think 74 was your last season, if my memory's correct, right?
Yes.
And you had a freshman receiver on that team. He caught 4 passes, and he ended up being maybe the best receiver in Florida history. And that was Wes Chandler. And so there is a learning curve. And that's the point there, that you get Les Chandler ended up being here, and an offensive player of the year in the NFL at one point, top 10 in the Heisman voting in Florida, an All-American receiver in a wishbone offense. But it took even him time to adjust. So for a young guy like Eugene Wilson right now, and you played the position as well as at the All-American level, what are some of the things he just got there, I think, this summer, Lee? So what are some of the adjustments he's having to go through right now? And, because it's easy for a fan to say, well, look what he did. He needs to be playing all 69 snaps on offense. Okay. But what are some of the things, the adjustments he's having to go through right now, so to instill confidence in the staff that he can be out there more and more snaps?
Yeah. Well, what we don't know is what he doesn't know. That sounded like Bobby Bowden, didn't it? we don't know what he knows as far as the playbook is concerned. He may know it all. But one of the big steps, and I've said this before, I think the jump from high school to college is bigger than the jump from college to the NFL. I think it's significantly more difficult. The amount of time you spend practicing, working. So it's still early in the season, but there's some endurance to that you don't have to do in high school. Not quite as not as intense, not as long. The second thing is the speed of the game. So he's obviously fast, but there's other fast people that are going to be around him all the time. But the intensity that you have to play every down to get on the field and be good is another step. You can get away from with some things in high school when you're more talented than everybody else. And a guy like him is significantly more talented than a lot of his competition. Not true when he gets to this level. So it will be know what to do, and you got to go full speed every snap. There's no floating. And it's also the precision. If you're supposed to run a 14-yard route, 12's not good and 16's not good either. You need to be at that down and not the down and distance, but the exact distance if the throwing game's going to work. So it just gets more detailed, and those details, you have to learn it, but you also have to be able to do it consistently. And that takes some time and maturity.
We talked about his players. Just a couple more questions here with Lee McGriff, Gator Great. Also, if you like the show, make sure you like it, subscribe to it, leave a comment. But Lee, you mentioned how resilient players are, and you look back to the teams that you were on, 72, 73, 74, some tough losses. You had to eat some tough losses, particularly in 74, which we talked about the last time you were on the show. As a coach later on, you also had to deal with some disappointing losses. I think you were on the staff in 80, so you had the loss to Georgia. 81, you had the heartbreaking loss in week 1 to Miami, a game that you all, I think, fumbled it away. Felt like you should have won the game. Miami wins on a last-second field goal. A lot of heartbreaking and disappointing losses. So what's going through the mind of the staff right now? You've had all offseason to get ready for this one game. You go out there and, quite frankly, I don't want to say lay an egg, but the fans, that's what they're saying. But it was a disappointing loss, a humbling loss. So what's the mindset of the coaching staff right now at Florida?
Win this game, eliminate the mistakes, get your players to play all the things we've been talking about as they should. And what happens, particularly with an early loss in the season, you got the whole season to go. And it's just like Utah. They lost to Florida last year. They probably thought, the fans, about the end of the world. How in the world could Utah, they were expected to be good, comes here and loses, but they go back, win their conference, get to the Rose Bowl. That, as a coach, if you can't handle that, you can't be in coaching, because it's a crisis business. And you can work your brains off 365 days a year, but when it gets down to it, there's only 12 days. And if you get to a playoff or a bowl game, 13, 14, something like, but for the regular season, imagine doing a business that where you only had 12 days in the year to make it work. That's coaching. And so if you can't shake this off, get over it, understand what just happened, teach your guys, and really, no exaggeration, I would say to myself, thank God we have another game. I don't want to live with what just happened. Let's go play. And so if the Gators end up winning a bunch of games, and it has to start with McNeese State, if you can do that, that's how you win. That's how you have a great season. And this first game eventually will be further and further in the rear view mirror. You have to embrace that. If you can't handle that, you can't coach.
Lee, Ron Zook, and we just have a couple more questions for you. You've been gracious with your time. Ron Zook used to say you have to block out the noise in the system. I think that was his phrase there. How do you block it out? How in that building, in this social media age, Lee, heck, you and I are dinosaurs and we're on social media. So how in this world can you block out everything? How much of a challenge is that? The naysayers are going to be in the ears of the kids every day, every waking minute.
You know, and that's a great point. Back in the day, you thought it was a big deal. It was in the newspaper. It might be on the radio, those kinds of things. But now, my goodness, it's at another level that especially the players, because the coaches can block it out more easily, but the players' friends and people they're around and their families, they're so inundated with social media about this stuff. It has to be tougher than ever to block it out. But again, you have to be able to do it. You can't play if you can't do it, and you can't coach. You're living in a bit of a cocoon when you're playing and coaching. You have to again to shake this off. Because again, look what you and I on a Tuesday are talking about, all our concerns. Keith, those coaches and players are not remotely talking about this like you and I are, and the fans. They're not. They have moved on. And if they're not, well, McNeese State may beat them. So it really is the emotional component, the focus and the emotional component of being a player and a coach is as big, maybe at times like now, bigger than the physical part. You can have a talented body, but if you can't handle the emotions, the disappointment, the struggles, you can't play and you can't coach. You have to be able to manage that.
Lee, some of the great Gator teams had to overcome incredibly heartbreaking losses. The 80 loss to Georgia, and that team still finished with the biggest turnaround in NCAA history. The 76 team lost to Georgia and couldn't recover, couldn't win that next week against Kentucky. 1994, Florida, the choke-a-doke. The next week, people forget, Florida had to play in the SEC championship game a week later. And what did? They turn around and they shocked the world and they beat an unbeaten Alabama team. So some of the greatest Gator teams in our lifetime overcame those incredibly disappointing and humbling games. And this was a humbling loss. There's no question about that. But I want to thank Lee McGriff, Gator Great, for joining us on Talking Gators today. Lee, we appreciate your time. I'm Keith Niebuhr with Gators Online. Take care, everybody.